Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name's Marcus. You'd think spotting a toxic relationship would be easy, like catching a glaring red flag waving in your face. But sometimes you're so deep in it, you don't see the patterns until something snaps you awake. For me, that moment came when my fiancée, Lila, turned away from me in bed one night and muttered, "Don't touch me." Her voice was sharp, deliberate, like a blade slicing through the quiet. That wasn't just a bad mood, it was a tactic one I'd been blind to for too long. That night shifted everything, and I decided to do something she'd never see coming. To understand how I got here, though, we need to go back to the beginning, to the days before Lila and I were anything more than strangers. I'd been drawn to her long before we ever spoke. It wasn't just a passing attraction. It was the kind that lingers, the kind that makes you notice every small thing she does. Lila had this energy, this way of lighting up a room without trying. I wasn't obsessed, but I was aware of her always. When we finally became friends, I jumped at the chance. It felt like landing a role I'd been auditioning for my whole life. From the start, I was the reliable one. I listened when she vented about her job, her family, her string of messy relationships. I was there through her lows, bad breakups, late-night tears, moments when she felt like the world was against her. If she needed a ride, I was there. If she was stressed and hadn't eaten, I'd show up with takeout. I'd crack jokes to pull a smile out of her when she was on the edge of breaking down. I watched her fall for guys who didn't deserve her. They'd ghost her, bail on plans, or only show up when it suited them. She'd pour her heart into them, and they'd leave her shattered. I'd be there to pick up the pieces, no questions asked. It wasn't easy, standing on the sidelines, wanting to be the one she chose, but knowing I wasn't. Still, I stayed patient. I told myself that if I was steady, if I showed her what real care looked like, maybe one day she'd see me differently. And eventually, she did. After too many heartbreaks, Lila turned to me, not just as her friend, but as someone she could love. When it happened, it felt like the world had finally aligned. I'd waited so long, and now it was real. I didn't carry any resentment into our relationship. I wasn't bitter about the years I'd spent as her friend, watching her chase others. If anything, it made me more determined to make her feel valued. Lila wasn't just someone I was dating. She was the person I dreamed of. I made it my mission to make her happy. Every moment we shared, every laugh, every touch, every quiet night in meant something to me. I treated our relationship like it was delicate, something to protect at all costs. I wasn't aiming for perfection. I just wanted her to feel safe, loved, and cared for. That's what I thought love was. But I didn't see the cracks forming. I didn't realize I was pouring everything into proving myself while never asking if she was doing the same. Looking back, the signs were there, but love has a way of blurring your vision. I brushed off the small things, convincing myself they were just part of being together. But they weren't just bumps, they were warnings. The biggest one was how Lila's mood would shift whenever things didn't go her way. If I disagreed with her or pushed back on something she wanted, she'd turn cold. Not angry, not loud, just distant. No warmth, no affection, sometimes no words at all. It was like a switch flipped, and I'd be left scrambling to figure out what I'd done wrong. I'd try harder, bring her flowers, cook her favorite meal, apologize even when I wasn't sure why, just to bring back the Lila I loved. What I didn't see then was that I wasn't fixing anything. I was teaching her that withholding love was a tool, a way to control me. Every time I gave in, I reinforced it. I thought I was being a good partner, but I was being molded into someone who'd bend to her will. The worst part? She never used these tactics on the guys before me. The ones who treated her poorly, who didn't care enough to notice her silence. With them, she didn't dare pull away because she knew they wouldn't chase her. But with me, the guy who showed up, who loved her fiercely, she knew she could push. She knew I'd care enough to try to fix it. And that's when she started playing her game. I was the one who gave her the space to manipulate. And instead of valuing my devotion, she weaponized it. It's a bitter truth to swallow, but I was the one she could afford to toy with. I wasn't weak. I just believed love meant giving everything without expecting much in return. I was wrong, and that realization was about to change everything. After 2 years of dating, I proposed to Lila on a quiet evening by the lake in our small town of Ashwood. I'd planned it for weeks, picking a spot where the water reflected stars. When she said yes, her eyes sparkling under the moonlight, it felt like I'd won something rare. I was all in, ready to build a life together. But looking back, I see now that the cracks in our relationship didn't start after the proposal. They were just easier to ignore before it. A few weeks later, something shifted that made those cracks impossible to miss. Lila approached me one afternoon while I was working from our apartment. She slid onto the couch beside me, her phone in hand, and said, "Since we're getting married, it makes no sense for me to keep paying rent at my place." Her tone was casual, practical even, and I couldn't argue with the logic. Why keep two apartments when we were planning a future together? I agreed she could move in, thinking it was a step toward our shared life. But that decision marked the beginning of a subtle shift I didn't fully grasp at the time. Once Lila moved in, things changed in ways I hadn't expected. She didn't contribute to rent or utilities, not even the occasional grocery bill. If I brought it up, she'd brush it off with a smile, saying, "We're a team now, right?" Or she'd promise to pitch in later, when things settled. But later never came. Instead, the apartment started to feel less like mine. My old bookshelves were pushed to the side to make room for her decorative vases. My favorite worn-out armchair was replaced with a sleek, uncomfortable couch she insisted we needed. She'd come home with new curtains, scented candles, or some pricey kitchen gadget, and the expectation was clear: I'd cover the cost. If I hesitated or suggested we hold off, her warmth would vanish. She'd go quiet, her smiles replaced by a blank stare, and I'd feel the air in the apartment grow heavy. I told myself it was fine. I wanted her to feel at home, to feel like this was our space. But the truth was I was starting to feel like a guest in my own life. If I tried to talk about money or splitting costs, Lila had a way of turning it around. "You're the one who wanted this life together," she'd say, her voice soft but edged with guilt. "Don't you want to take care of me?" It sounded like a plea, but it felt like a demand. If I pushed back, she'd withdraw completely. No affection, no conversation, just a cold distance that could last days. I'd end up apologizing, paying for whatever she wanted, just to see her smile again. I didn't realize I was being trained to avoid those silences at all costs. The pattern grew clearer, but I still didn't call it what it was. I convinced myself that this was just how relationships worked. Give and take, mostly give. I didn't ask where her money went, why she never offered to chip in, or why every purchase seemed to fall on me. I was too afraid of rocking the boat, of seeming petty or unloving. So I let it slide over and over until one day something happened that forced me to see things differently. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd gotten off work early after a client canceled a meeting. I decided to surprise Lila with dinner, maybe some takeout from her favorite Thai place in Ashwood. I came in through the back door of our apartment, quieter than usual, not wanting to make a big entrance. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard her voice from the bedroom, sharp and confident, on speakerphone. I froze, catching words that didn't sit right. "He never says no for long," she said, laughing lightly. "If he tries, I just shut him out. Works like a charm." Her friend on the other end chuckled, saying, "You're ruthless, Lila." She didn't miss a beat, replying, "Not ruthless, smart. You just have to know how to play it." My stomach dropped. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as her words sank in. All those moments of her pulling away, the silent treatments, the sudden coldness. It wasn't just her being upset. It was a strategy. She was admitting it, laughing about it, like I was some puzzle she'd cracked. The warmth I'd chased, the affection I'd worked so hard to earn, it was all a game to her. I wasn't her partner. I was her mark. My mind raced, piecing together every time I'd apologize for nothing, every time I'd bent over backward to make her happy. She wasn't reacting to me. She was manipulating me. I didn't barge in. I didn't yell or confront her. Instead, I slipped back out the door, my heart pounding, and drove around Ashwood for an hour, tried to process what I'd heard. When I got home later, I played it cool. I smiled, asked about her day, acted like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was different. I was watching her now, seeing every move for what it was. And I was starting to plan. The weeks after I overheard Lila's phone call were like living in a fog. I went through the motions, work, dinner with her, small talk, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying her words. I just shut him out. Works like a charm. Every time I looked at her, laughing or curling up next to me on the couch, I saw the calculation behind it. The warmth I once craved now felt like a trap, a reward for playing her game. But I didn't let on. I kept my face neutral, my tone steady, waiting for the right moment to act. I wasn't sure what I'd do yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Then came the moment that pushed me closer to the edge. About a month before her birthday, Lila walked into the kitchen one evening, holding a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me with a bright smile, her eyes glinting with expectation. "This is what I want for my birthday," she said, her voice light but firm. I unfolded the paper and scanned the list: designer bags, jewelry, a new phone, and a spa weekend. The total cost had to be north of $6,000. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression blank. We were in the middle of saving for a wedding, venue deposits, catering quotes, all of it adding up fast. This wasn't just a birthday wish, it was a demand, another test. I took a breath and suggested we sit down to talk. "I'm not saying no to everything," I said carefully, "but we're planning a wedding, Lila. Maybe we can pick a couple things from the list and prioritize." Her smile faded instantly. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing just enough to notice, and gave a curt, "Fine." Then she walked away, her footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. I knew that fine. It wasn't agreement. It was the opening shot in her usual playbook. I braced myself for what was coming. That night, as we climbed into bed, the air was thick with tension. Lila turned her back to me, her body rigid, claiming her side of the bed like it was a line in the sand. I reached out, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I still loved her, or at least the version of her I believed in. My hand barely grazed her shoulder when she spoke, her voice low and icy. "Don't touch me tonight." The words hit like a slap, sharp and intentional. I pulled back, lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My heart pounded, but not with sadness. Anger, clarity, something new. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was too busy connecting the dots. How many times had I let this slide? How many nights had I apologized for nothing, chased her affection, or paid for her whims just to avoid this exact silence? It wasn't love, it was control, and I'd been too blind to call it what it was. That moment, her cold whisper cutting through the dark, was the final straw. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. I lay there, planning, knowing I couldn't keep playing her game. The next morning, Lila was out for her usual run, her routine as predictable as ever. The second the door clicked shut behind her, I moved. I pulled out boxes from the closet and started packing her things. Clothes, shoes, the endless bottles of skincare cluttering the bathroom sink, the trinkets she'd scattered around my apartment. I worked methodically, folding her sweaters, stacking her books, every item a reminder of how much I'd let her take over my space, my life. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was calm, focused, like I was reclaiming something I'd lost. By the time I finished, her belongings were neatly boxed by the front door, a silent statement she couldn't misread. When Lila got back, I watched through the peephole as she froze, her eyes locked on the boxes. Her face shifted from confusion to panic. She knocked, first softly, then harder, her voice rising. "Marcus? Marcus, what's this?" "Open the door." I stood there, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door, and took a deep breath. Then, in the same flat tone she'd used on me the night before, I said, "Goodbye, Lila." The word felt final, like cutting a rope I'd been clinging to for too long. She didn't take it quietly. Her knocks turned to bangs, her voice cracking into a shout. "Marcus, what are you doing? Talk to me." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd been playing me for years, and I'd finally stopped playing along. I heard her pacing outside, her voice muffled as she called someone, probably one of her friends. I didn't care to listen. I just waited, knowing this was the end of something that should have ended long ago. The silence after Lila's banging on the door stopped was deafening. I stood there, still leaning against the door, listening as her footsteps faded and a car, engine revved outside. Peeking through the curtain, I saw her friend Sarah's sedan pull up. Lila was loading her boxes into the trunk, her movements sharp and angry, her face a mix of disbelief and frustration. Sarah glanced at the apartment, shaking her head, but they didn't linger. The car peeled out, and just like that, Lila was gone from my space. I sank onto the couch, the weight of what I'd done settling in. My apartment felt too big, too empty, but also like it was mine again. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bare shelves where her things used to be. Part of me wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I could have talked it out instead of packing her life into boxes. Had I overreacted? Should I have given her a chance to explain? But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about one fight or one list of demands. It was about years of her pulling strings I hadn't even seen, manipulating me with silence and affection like I was a puppet. I'd spent so long trying to be what she needed that I'd forgotten what I deserved. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I'd been too patient. The call started that same day. First, it was Lila's friend, Tara. Her voice was sharp, no pretense of kindness. "Marcus, how could you do that to her? You're cold," she spat. I let her talk, her words stinging but not sinking in. When she paused, I said calmly, "You've got your opinion, Tara. I respect that. But don't call me again." I hung up before she could respond. The next day, another friend, Mia, called. She was softer, almost pleading. "Lila's a mess. Marcus, you didn't even give her a chance to talk. That was cruel." Again, I didn't argue. I just repeated the same line. "You're entitled to your view, but please don't call me again." I wasn't interested in defending myself to people who'd already picked their side. It wasn't surprising that Lila's friends rallied around her. They didn't know the whole story, and I wasn't going to beg them to hear it. Loyalty blinds people, and I got that. But it still hurt, knowing they saw me as the villain without asking why I'd done it. I didn't owe them an explanation, but the accusations made me question myself again. Had I been fair? Was there a better way? Each time, I came back to the same answer. I'd given Lila everything, my time, my heart, my home, and she'd used it to control me. I couldn't unhear her laughing about it on that phone call. I couldn't unsee the pattern. The first few weeks without her were strange. I expected to feel wrecked, but instead, there was a quiet relief. I could cook what I wanted without her commenting that it wasn't her taste. I could watch my old sci-fi movies without her rolling her eyes and changing the channel. I slept better, no longer tensing up for the next cold shoulder. The apartment felt like mine again, even if it was emptier. I started small, putting my old books back on the shelves, hanging a poster I'd always liked. It was like rediscovering pieces of myself I'd tucked away to make her comfortable. But the real test came about a month later. I woke up one morning to a text from Lila, sent at 2 a.m. It was short. "I messed up, Marcus. Can we talk? I want to apologize." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. For a split second, I felt the old pull, the part of me that wanted to believe her, that hoped she'd changed. But then I remembered her voice on that call, the casual pride in how she'd played me. This wasn't remorse. It was another move, a test to see if she could still pull me back in. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and blocked her number. Silence was my answer, and it felt louder than any words I could have sent. That moment was a turning point. I realized I wasn't just walking away from Lila. I was walking away from the version of myself who'd let her control me. I'd spent years thinking love meant giving everything, proving myself over and over. But love shouldn't feel like a transaction, and it shouldn't leave you chasing someone's approval. Lila had taught me that, even if it was the hard way. The months after cutting contact with Lila were like waking up from a long, disorienting dream. I'd spent so long orbiting her needs that I'd forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. Slowly, I started rebuilding, small things at first, like rearranging the apartment to reflect me again. My old vinyl records went back on the shelf, and I dug out the coffee maker Lila had replaced with her fancy espresso machine. I wasn't erasing her. I was reclaiming what I'd given up. The peace that came with it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like a heartbeat settling into rhythm. But the clarity didn't stop the questions. I kept circling back to how I'd missed the signs for so long. Love had blinded me, sure, but it was more than that. I've been so focused on being what Lila needed, reliable, supportive, devoted, that I hadn't noticed how little she gave back. The silence, the withdrawals, the way her affection seemed to come with conditions. They weren't just quirks. They were tools she used to keep me in line. I'd mistaken her need for me as love, but need and love aren't the same. She needed my stability, my wallet, my willingness to bend. But love? That was never part of the equation. What stung the most was realizing how deliberate it all was. Lila didn't pull those tactics with the guys who treated her poorly, guys who ignored her calls or showed up only when it suited them. She didn't dare freeze them out because they wouldn't have cared. But with me, she knew she could. I'd given her the power by caring too much, by always trying to fix things. I'd handed her the playbook, and she'd used it without hesitation. That realization didn't just hurt, it changed how I saw myself. I wasn't weak, but I'd been naive, believing love meant proving your worth every day. I'm not rushing into another relationship. Right now, I'm content being on my own, figuring out who I am without someone else's expectations shaping me. I've got no interest in tying myself to anyone until I meet someone who gives as much as they take, who sees love as a partnership, not a game. If that never happens, I'm okay with that too. I've learned to value my own company, to find peace in the quiet I used to dread. To anyone reading this, especially if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're always chasing closeness, listen closely. Look for the patterns. If saying no means being shut out, if affection feels like a reward for giving in, that's not love, it's control. Don't confuse being needed with being loved. Real love doesn't demand you prove yourself over and over. It doesn't drain you, it builds you up. If you're giving more than you're getting, pay attention. You might be teaching someone how to manipulate you without even realizing it. I don't know what Lila's doing now, and I don't care. Her friends might still think I'm the bad guy, but their opinions don't define me. I know the truth, and I know what I walked away from. That's enough. If my story resonates, if it sounds like something you're living through, don't ignore it. Sometimes the hardest choice, walking away, is the only way to find yourself again. Trust me, it's worth it.